Hello and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. My name is Wendy Green and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And Hey Boomer is a show for people who believe that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. It is for lifelong learners who are finding meaning and purpose in this next stage of our lives and living the best life that they can. Before we get started, I have a couple of announcements. The first one is that you do not want to miss what's coming up on Hey Boomer. And so let me encourage you to subscribe to the email list. You can subscribe by going to https://bit.ly/heyboomer-subscribe. I promise no spam. You will get 2 emails a week, one with events and a blog and who's coming up. And the next one will be with the show links for that day. So go ahead and subscribe to the email list so you don't miss a thought-provoking or inspirational episode. My next announcement is about our Costa Rica trip. We are taking an exclusive Hey Boomer Costa Rica trip with Rhodes Scholar to Costa Rica, obviously, June 10th, 2nd through the 10th, next summer. During that trip, we're going to the Manuel Antonio National Park, which is the crown jewel of Costa Rica's renowned environmental protective efforts. We are also going to experience 2 lesser-known jewels, a private cloud forest reserve protected by a Costa Rican family for decades, and a lush rainforest where a South African family welcomes us to their safari lodge. It's going to be amazing. Like I said, it's exclusive for Hey Boomer listeners, followers, friends, family. So if you are interested in hearing more, finding out how to register, drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. I would love to have you on this trip with us. All right, so let's talk about celebrations of aging. So every day we hear, whether we realize it or not, derogatory remarks about aging. In fact, we may say some of them ourselves. We may say things like, "Oh, I was having a senior moment." Or we may say something like, "Aging is not for sissies." I would say being a teen today is not for sissies either, but that's another story. But industry profits by shaming us about aging. Think about all of the commercials you see for anti-aging makeup, or, keep your hair not going gray. All these things that are supposed to make us feel bad about getting older. And they tell us how we should think, how we should feel, how we should look. And I don't want us to buy into that anymore. So today we're going to talk with Janine Vanderburg, who is really one of the leaders in the Anti-Ageism movement. And we are going to celebrate aging, and we are going to explore our own beliefs or misconceptions about aging. And, diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions going on in corporations today. And so she's doing some work around that too. So let me bring Janine on and do a brief introduction. Hi, Janine.
So excited to be here with you. And I really want to be on that Costa Rican trip. That's amazing.
I know. I hope you'll join us. I know. So before I do introduction, I just need to say, Janine, you look wonderful for your age. And for both of us who are 69, right? 69 is the new 49, right?
Oh, Wendy. So I am sure you get told frequently, you look great for your age. And here's what those of us who are anti-ageism activists maybe think about that phrase, that somehow at a certain age, we're supposed to start looking really awful, right? That
Right.
it's better. So I know that many people, I've said it, view it as a compliment. And really the best thing would be if we just stop at, you look great. So
That's right.
Wendy, you look great. Let's leave off
Janine.
that for your age part of it. Yeah, 69. 69 is not the new 40.
No,
69 is 69.
that's
There
right.
are a lot of joys, and remembering also what it was like to be 40 and have kids and juggling career and all the and volunteer work. I kind of like being 69, so
I do
I'm gonna
too.
leave it right there. I'm gonna leave it.
I like it too, Janine. I am proud to say my age, and you do look wonderful.
Thank you. You do as well at any age.
That's right. So let me tell the audience a little bit about you. So Janine leads Changing the Narrative, which is the nation's leading effort to change the way people think, talk, and act about aging and ageism through evidence-based strategies, strategic communications, and innovative public campaigns. She founded its Age-Friendly Workplace Initiative, which won a Metro Vision Award from the Denver Regional Council of Governments to call attention to the business case for older workers and intergenerational teams. Janine also chairs the Encore Network, of which I am part, a global coalition of leaders who champion the civic, social, and economic contributions of people 50 plus. She serves on the board of the Center for Workforce Inclusion Labs, which advances bold and innovative solutions to labor force challenges. Janine lives in the North Fork Valley of Colorado, which I know is just gorgeous right now. And I am just so grateful and excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here because we're going to talk about all my favorite things. So,
and mine too. Mine too.
Well,
So tell me about Changing the Narrative. I mean, I love the name, but how did that come about?
So Changing the Narrative actually started in 2018. And actually, my good friend Therese Ellery, who was then with Rose Community Foundation, it was her brainchild. She was part of kind of a national movement, and she was on the board of Grantmakers in Aging when a number of leading organizations in aging commissioned an organization. This is a little bit long and wonky, but bear with me. Commissioned an organization called Frameworks Institute to determine how does the general public in the United States think about aging and older people? And are there messages and communication strategies that we can use to change the narrative about it? So we started in Colorado, although Changing the Narrative now works across the United States and beyond. And initially, it was simply about doing workshops and technical assistance on reframing aging. And one of the things that happened in that first year was I did 42 in-person workshops. And in every single workshop that I did, somebody would come up to me, and sometimes it was in whispers after the workshop, and they would say, you know, that ageism and workplace thing that you're talking about, it happened to me, it happened to my partner, it happened to my dad, I heard from younger people. And I was like, this is really interesting. So I went back to my funders, which include now a Next 50 initiative. And I said, you know, we can't just talk about reframing aging. We need to directly address ageism head on. And I had the most wonderful and innovative funders who said, you go. And so we did. And so really even the term changing the narrative means to us, it's changing the story that we tell ourselves about aging. Mm-hmm. It's changing the story that is told about older women in the workforce and older men. It's changing the story that healthcare providers may have about us as we get older, as in, oh, your knee just hurts because you're older. No, my knee hurts because I did this flying leap and I landed on my knee. My other knee, which is just as old, is just fine. So right. think about story, really changing the narrative just means, how do we change the stories that we tell about ourselves, but also that others tell about us? So that's how we started. We've been around now for 5 years. We now address ageism in healthcare, ageism in the workplace, ageism in popular culture, and whatever other ideas. So when we do things like this, inevitably we'll hear from people after who will say things like, have you thought about ageism in this sphere? And we're like, interesting. We'll think about that and we'll research it. So
I'm just curious, when you first realized that ageism was a thing, that it was a problem.
So, Wendy, why this is so interesting and both embarrassing to me is, before changing the narrative, I ran a consulting firm that I had founded, and I ran it for over 3 decades. And there, if anything, I didn't experience ageism. If anything, the opposite was true, that some of our clients would say, oh, we don't want to work with some of your younger staff. We want to work with you because you have the gray hair. And I was like, but I don't know a thing about quantitative statistical analysis. You really do want to work with somebody on my team instead. So I had seen before mostly ageism directed against younger people. It wasn't really until changing the narrative, and I was doing these workshops, and I'll share a story of one in particular, because that really made me realize that we had to talk about the business case for older workers. I was doing a workshop in this community, and there were a lot of women our age, and they all looked great. But they were, I just noticed that when we were and we did the workshop, and then we kind of did a lunch and learn, and people were like literally taking food and stuffing it in tote bags. I'm like, what's going on? And I sat down with them, and I realized that there were a number of women my age who had been pushed out of the workplace and who could not get jobs in the community, even though if you went down the main street, there were help wanted signs in almost every kind of establishment. And so I was talking with them about that, and they were like, they don't want people our age. And so that led me down the exploration to what extent that older people, and especially older women, are discriminated against as we get older. And also how it affects us financially, right? Because I think women in our generation, the boomer generation, we were there in the workforce, but for most of us, we were paid less over a lifetime. We were more likely to have stepped out of the workplace to caregive for children or for older family members. And so you kind of start multiplying that. And then if you face ageism as you get older, you're in a much more financially precarious position than are men. And so so I would say all of these things came together to increase my awareness of ageism, but then it also allowed me to look back at experiences that I had where I hadn't thought about ageism being a factor. So I had served, for example, on the Denver Commission on Aging, and one of my fellow commissioners who actually chaired the commission, at one point, I think we were thinking about doing a food basket program for older adults in the community. And she just looked at me and she said, I wouldn't need a food basket if somebody would give me a job. And at the time I just thought, okay, but I didn't have ageism as a lens. I didn't understand it.
Right.
And I realized that, this highly capable woman had experienced, significant ageism as she grew older. So,
yeah. And, I think it's very similar for me. I certainly experienced ageism. In fact, I lost a job in 2017 at 64, 1 year before I could get on Medicare.
Yeah.
And I think it was a totally ageist
right.
Decision, but hard to prove. You couldn't really take it to court. But I still would not have called it, I would call it discriminatory, but I wouldn't have called it ageism. I just didn't have that awareness then.
Right.
So
doing
this.
You'll probably find this interesting. During the pandemic, changing the narrative, we did a survey of people age 50 and over to find out how people were affected by the pandemic in terms of workforce. And it was a scientific sample. And what was really interesting was like over 3/4 of people age 50, and we did this survey in Colorado. So over 3/4 of people age 50 and over in Colorado had been affected, reporting being laid off, pushed out, salary decreased, right? A lot of the things. But what was interesting when we asked, and so how many of you have experienced age discrimination? 1/3 said absolutely yes. 40% said they didn't know. When we looked at their open-ended responses, I was like, "Oh, yes, you experienced age discrimination." It was sort of like, "I don't know if I have, but, I got pushed out after training a younger worker, and the younger worker
Right?
job."
Yep, I
Age
know.
discrimination,
We
right?
don't realize it
But we
when
don't
it's
know.
happening.
And
Yeah,
and that's
we
why you doing kind of shows like this are so important, so that we can increase awareness of it and what we can do about it.
yeah. So we're all aging. I mean, even the young, we're all aging, right? So why do you think it is so acceptable to make fun of getting old and, just all of the industry talking about, oh, save your wrinkles, stop your wrinkles. Like, why do you think that's so
I
okay?
wish I knew an answer to the why. I mean, it just doesn't make sense, right? It's the one ism that all of if we're fortunate, we're all gonna face, right? Because for each one
Right.
of us, as today is the oldest. I'm sharing this with everybody. Today is the oldest we've ever been. And think about this before you go to
That's
sleep tonight. This is the youngest I will ever be, right? If we are fortunate, we're all
right.
waking up tomorrow a day older. So we're all gonna face it. There are a lot of theories in academic literature about why ageism exists, and some people say, "Oh, it's fear of dying." Other people say, it all started in the Industrial Revolution, where all of a sudden productivity and how fast you could make widgets became really important. There are some people that take it back to the invention of the printing press when you didn't need older people to communicate knowledge and wisdom anymore. But I think you actually hit on it during your introduction. It's financial. There is a lot of money to be
Mhm,
made in anti-aging. And
mhm.
if we weren't surrounded by ageist messages that getting older is wrong, would we really spend $100 on a jar of cream? Probably not. So, I mean, there is money to be made. I mean, it's billions, billion-dollar industries. So I think that is why it exists. And to me, the interesting question is, how do we, as we get older, get out of believing and having absorbed all the ageist messages? One of the things that, to me, Wendy, is really interesting in the research about ageism is actually the older we get, the more that we have implicit bias against
Mhm.
other older people. And we do
Yeah.
that because, the theory is we've absorbed these ageist messages from society for a long time. And I sometimes like to tell the story of my dad. The year after my mom died, of course, the siblings, I'm the oldest of five, the siblings get worried and we're like, Dad, we want to, we tried to start showing him some like independent living communities and that kind of thing. And at some point, my dad had this habit of just literally waving his arm across his chest to say, this conversation is over. And so he did that move and he said, Janine, I'm not going to live in any of these. And I was like, why not? Everybody here is old.
That's right.
My dad was 88 at the
I've
time.
heard that before.
So, I mean, it's just that's the extent to which, right, we
Yeah.
categorize us. So I think, it's then up to us who are older to just say, "Okay, we can put a stop to this." I've always believed, civil rights leader Grace Lee Boggs, once said, "We are the leaders we've been waiting for." So I think it's up to us.
I
Like,
love
nobody
that.
else is gonna come out of the woodwork and say, "Oh, we're gonna help those older women deal with ageism." It's us. So
Yeah, and it is an implicit bias. I mean, I remember when my parents moved into a senior living facility, and they were in independent aging, but they went to a cafeteria, well, a restaurant, on the facility,
right.
and I would go and see all these walkers and people in, motorized wheelchairs, and I would be so uncomfortable because I didn't want to be that person in the walker or in the wheelchair. And it has taken a while for me to recognize we're all aging. They're still doing
Right,
things. They're still involved in conversations. They still have friends. It's like how do we get out of this?
right,
All these messages we've internalized.
right. And I think I'm glad you put up there's also that intersection, right, of ageism and ableism that somehow, we have this fear of we're not going to be as capable as we were. And it somehow suggests that if you have to use a walker or use a wheelchair, that you're not capable. And we know that's absolutely not true. Um, so I do think it starts with us. I mean, one of the things that we know, and again, why a show like this is so important, is a really powerful way of addressing ageism and reducing it is educating ourselves about ageism. how it works, how it shows up, and more importantly, what we can do about it. And there are a lot of, there are a lot of things that we can do. We don't have to sit back. A friend of mine liked to say, in the 60s, many of us were working on changing the world in various parts of the world, in the women's movement, social justice,
Mhm.
racial justice, etc., civil
Yep,
rights. Um, and her question is, can we do it again in our 60s? And I would argue, absolutely, in our 50s, 60s, and 70s. We're
absolutely.
well poised. We've got probably some experience in activism at some point of our lives, whether it
Mhm.
was, when we were very young, or, I often think of women, the activism that if any of us have school-aged children or had school-aged children, we were certainly always active in that. And then, we can do this again. So it's up to us.
Yeah, we can do it again. Here's a comment. David says, funny thing, when he was about 60, people started asking him when he was planning to retire. Like, now you're old, retire.
Yeah, so David, thank you for raising that,
I
because
know.
those are so very often, and Wendy, I know you mentioned earlier you weren't sure maybe, when you left your position about whether it was age discrimination, but very often it's very subtle like that.
Mhm.
People are not going to come up to you and say, usually, actually, and I'll have to tell you a story about my friend of mine where literally somebody said that, but mostly they're not going to come up to you and say they're too old. But usually what happens is people start asking you, when are you going to retire? Or you don't get invited to meetings that you were a part of.
Mhm.
Or, I mean, there's research by AARP that shows very often employers will invest in younger employees, but if they have a professional development opportunity, they won't offer it to older employees under the mistaken belief that the older employee is going to leave soon.
Right.
Now, we know that's actually not the case. The research actually shows that older employees have 4 times the tenure on average that younger employees, and that's not to bash younger people. When we're younger, we're looking for new opportunities and that kind of thing. But it's that sort of misguided in those myths and stereotypes that result in people asking you, David, and others, are you going to retire yet, or not, including you. And to me, the most irritating thing is when, I hear about companies that, for example, won't train older workers on a new software, right? That's going to be rolled out throughout the company. And then they complain, oh, well, older people are digitally incompetent. Well,
Right.
kind of if we went to the professional development, we probably do just fine. So, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of things.
It's yeah, it's insipid and it's everywhere. And so we have to be very vigilant. But I want to talk about celebrations,
Yes.
right? So there's not a lot of people that celebrate getting older. Do you know, I have to tell you a quick story. When I turned 60, there's we have a downtown area where they have dancing and a live band every Friday night outside. And I decided, you know what? I am going to celebrate turning 60. So I baked a cake
Yeah,
and I brought it downtown. And I was like, happy birthday to me. Everybody have a piece of cake.
I love it. I love it.
I know.
So, I have a good friend who's turning 70 today, and what she's doing is she's doing a Dancing with the Stars party, so none
Awesome.
of that. She's just, she's always been a little over the top anyway, but she was like, "Hey, let's," and she's shouting it out. Literally, she was all over social media yesterday saying, "Turning 70, and guess what? I'm doing a reprisal." She had previously done a Dancing with the Stars party at a previous birthday, and so, she's doing that again, and I think that there are, like, so many ways to celebrate. And one of the things that I think globally we should be celebrating is the fact that we are living longer. I mean, the reality is, and there's been this sort of pandemic exception where life expectancy went down a bit. But overall, across the world, people are living longer and for the most part, healthier lives. So we should just be celebrating that, advances in medical science and public health have resulted in our ability to not only live longer, but live longer and healthier. Um, and so, and then for all of us, it's we have opportunities to learn new things. We have opportunities now that people didn't have in prior days as they got older. The fact that you can do a podcast, Hey Boomer, celebrating, as opposed to, I'm just going to go and kind of retire and hide in my room and watch television, right? I mean, those are
Right.
the kind of things that people are doing today, and I think we should be celebrating all of that.
And like Becca Levy says in her book, if you have a healthy outlook, a positive outlook about aging, your life's
Yeah.
expectancy is about 7.5 years longer.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
So I am a total fan. Can I show a copy of Becca Levy's book?
Absolutely. Mhm.
This is absolutely a must read. So Becca Levy's Breaking the Age Code. And I've been a fan of Dr. Becca Levy for a long time because when I was trying to get people, including older people like ourselves, to care about ageism, um, the most powerful thing was talking about Dr. Becca Levy's research, which showed not only 7.5 years of increased longevity, but also people who have positive beliefs about ourselves aging, almost a 50% lesser chance of developing dementia, even if you have the genetic marker for Alzheimer's, better physical health, better mental health, better cognition, better memory. And these are all experimental studies that she's done in her role as a professor and a PhD at the Yale School of Public Health. So it's really powerful research. I was so excited when she wrote the book. And the lovely thing is all her research is very solid research and has all of those academic papers, but the book is just also a really interesting read and story.
Yeah.
So highly recommend. And we are so encouraging people to do this at Changing the Narrative that we've created a downloadable toolkit that we call the Becca Levy Book Club. So you can read the book, get together with some friends, some wine, some coffee, and like literally discuss the book. And we've got the questions all set for you.
I know you do. I love it. I downloaded it. Here's a comment from Steve I think is kind of interesting. He says, one observation is that some younger employees object to the work ethic that older employees demonstrate, i.e. they're not checking phone, Instagram, etc., every few minutes while at work. And so, it's a different way of working. So you have some tools for intergenerational working.
Right. And so, Steve, and one of the things that I think is really careful, that we all need to be really careful about as older people, is to, in the same way that we don't want stereotypes, right, directed at us. So I don't want someone to make an assumption that I am digitally incompetent and can't maneuver my iPhone because their Uncle Harry needed their help in getting an iPhone. I think it's important for us. And so I appreciate, Steve, that you said some, to not make stereotypes about older workers writ large. So, for example, when people use the term entitled millennial, I have two incredibly hardworking millennial daughters, and so I think stereotypes about any age
At any age.
are dangerous. But one of the things that we've done is, and it's based on evidence and research that shows in a really effective way of reducing ageism, is by having intergenerational conversation. So intergenerational connection and education actually helps people understand each other better, right? It's like the same thing as exposure to, any sort of group that is different than you. And so we created a toolkit. It's on our website. It's under intergenerational conversation campaigns, but it's how to have an intergenerational conversation about ageism that you may have experienced in the workplace as a younger person or an older person, about stereotypes about younger people and older people. And we've got several topic areas, but again, kind of a toolkit that we highly, highly encourage people. In fact, on October 7th, is Ageism Awareness Day. And we're encouraging people to download our intergenerational conversation toolkit, invite some friends over, invite their kids over and have a conversation about how we experience ageism. This can also happen in a workplace. Download the Becca Levy toolkit and some other things as well.
Yeah, it's all about raising our awareness, raising the way we frame something, the way we say something, that ends up categorizing or stereotyping another person or ourselves, we've got to continue to raise that awareness.
And can I just add one more thing? When
Yeah.
you kind of, to Steve's point, Encore.org did a study this past summer, and it was kind of how generations look at each other. And so, how there are all those generational stereotypes in the media. It's like, okay, boomer, entitled millennial, and all of that. But actually, when you actually ask people who are in these different generations or different age groups, a lot of us are a lot more similar in how we think about work, how we think about family, how we think about community, how we think about meaning and purpose, etc., than media would have you believe. So I always think it's important to actually look at people as people, right? And not like the stereotype.
Yeah. So show me some of your example birthday cards before we get into another way to celebrate aging.
Right. So one of the things that happened, part of changing the narrative earlier, and this happened in our first year, is I was hearing from people about those awful ageist birthday cards. So let me share some of them with you, the kind of
Yes,
thing.
please do.
And I was doing a workshop in Maine, and someone said to me, I went into this gift shop, which had, beautiful gifts and cards and whatever, and I was going to buy a gift for a friend who was turning 60. And they had really ageist birthday cards. And she thought, am I going to spend my money in a place that has these cards that mimic as it get older? So what are some of the cards we're talking about? And I'll hold them up really close.
And say what it says, because for podcast listeners.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so this one says, you know that you are getting old when your boobs hang so low that you can have a mammogram and a pedicure at the same time.
Oh.
Then there's this one that basically depicts a toilet on some sort of motorized vehicle, and that says on the inside, have a sweet ride for someone your age. And then a fairly common a fairly common kind of theme is, everything, we're all in urologist office, right? Or we're all in some sort of medicine setting. And there are some people who say, well, why are you opposed to that if we just send it to each other as friends? And I kind of like to remind everybody that these cards are sitting on shelves, reinforcing stereotypes that people already have about older people. So your potential employer is looking at this. Your younger boss are looking at these. And it also, what does it say to each other when we send each other these cards? I mean, talk about internalized ageism. So one of the things we did at Changing the Narrative, and it was actually inspired by a friend of mine, Lori Brock, who was having a milestone birthday, and she had been a volunteer for us. And she was out there in community talking about people at ageism. And then she called me excitedly after her birthday, and she said, for the first time ever, I didn't get one of those awful cards. And so we thought, how about we create an anti-ageist birthday card contest? So what we did, and this was during the pandemic, we put a call out for artists to go ahead and do cards that celebrate aging instead of denigrating aging, right? So for example, this is one of my favorites. Some of you may have seen this on Wendy's social media. So she woke up, she put on her party hat and said, this calls for some champagne and shenanigans, right? We are celebrating getting older. Wouldn't you rather give a friend this celebratory?
I love that one.
Your boobs hang so low. Okay, so that's kind of one of them. This is actually my personal favorite, and it depicts on the front basically sort of a boat, a big balloon with somebody with kind of a big telescope looking forward. And inside it says, onward and upward to the next adventure. May this year be filled with new discoveries. And to me, for all of us in the Encore space, right, this is what we're kind of thinking about next. What are those adventures? What are we going to do next? So I like that this celebrates this. And then there were some cards that simply said, you know what, we should simply celebrate the fact we've gotten older. We've got, and this, I like this because this particular
I love that one too. Yeah.
This particular image is in the western slope of Colorado where I live, and these are the great sand cranes, and it simply says celebrate your seasons. And so, the sand cranes come into the area every fall and then go back and forth. And those to me are messages that say to our friends, our family members, we value you. You're amazing. Let's do
Yeah.
stuff, let's
Yeah.
celebrate aging and getting older.
And the artwork on those is so gorgeous on all of them. I'm going to show people where you can find this. So if you go to changingthenarrativeco.org, then you can go to campaigns and find the Anti-Ageist birthday cards. And there are so many gorgeous cards here. Where are they? That you can see. Oh, here, buy now. I mean, just beautiful, beautiful artwork in these cards. I've got a dozen that I've ordered, and they're just, gosh, they're gorgeous. So yeah, changingthenarrativeco.org. And as Maria says, she says, celebrate instead of denigrate, and not use these tasteless greeting cards that we have been getting. So thank you for that.
Maria, you're singing my song.
And I want to share something with you that a comment that my mom posted. So my mom, as she says in here, she's in her 93rd year, right? She's on Facebook watching this show. And she says, as long as your mind is working, you can learn and do things that are helpful to others. You can reach out, help others, mostly by writing to leaders and groups that can make things better. That's what she can still do at 92. So, yeah, she's a good role model for me. You're never too old, right?
I love that. And, my mom was a great role model for me when she grew up in a family where somehow, immigrant family, the boys went off to college and the girls did not. And she always wanted to go to college. And when she was 60, she looked at my dad and said, Ray, going to college. And she did. And she graduated 4 years later, magna cum laude, right? She achieved that dream. So the idea that somehow there's an expiration date on what we can do, what we're capable of, is another one of those ideas that we need to reject.
Yeah, my mom, she must have known your mom because she went back to school after we all left home, and she ended up getting her PhD. I'm like, oh my gosh.
There you
But
go.
she reminds me every once in a while, you don't have your, no, she doesn't really, but
there's still time, Wendy.
There's still time.
And it's not too late.
Exactly. So you mentioned Encore Network, and part of my inspiration for Hey Boomer was to create a platform to inspire boomers and beyond to be active and involved. Encore Network does something similar, although it's a little broader with intergenerational work as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So Encore Network is basically, think of it as almost, an association, a membership organization of people who believe in this big idea. I like to call it the Encore movement. Wendy, you've been a leader in the Encore movement, but it's the idea that there isn't an expiration date, that as we get older, there are certain things, there's a wisdom, some insight that we've accumulated that can be of value to others. So whether it's in the workforce of, intergenerational teams and reciprocal mentoring, whether it's out there in community around advocacy or volunteering. And I'll give you a few examples. I like to talk about my friend, Councilwoman Debbie Ortega from Denver, and she is our age. And when the pandemic hit, here's an example of how we can bring, our accumulated wisdom, connections, right? We build this stuff up over time. And so the pandemic hits. We know because of ageism, PPE, personal protective equipment, was not being directed to facilities with a lot of older people, whether it was skilled nursing or independent living or whatever, it wasn't going there. And so she basically mobilized people that she knew through her government connections. Churches were closed down. So she basically went to a local church and said, I need your space. She got people to donate sewing machines, fabrics, and then she employed a group of low-income women who had been pushed out of their jobs to basically make masks. She got everything donated. And she did all of this within a week. And within a month, they produced 30,000 masks.
Oh my gosh.
Did that because she had the connections, right, that you build up over time. As we get older, we know more people. We build up connections. She had the insight of how you could put these pieces together. And she had I don't know, the wisdom, the desire to make a difference. And I think we all have that desire to make a difference. And as we get older, we have a lot more ability to do that because of what we've learned over a lifetime. So that to me is something to be celebrated, are the things that we've learned over a lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. I have a listener, Christina, who is turning 21 in 3 weeks.
Yay.
I know.
Yeah.
And I applaud her. Christina writes a lot, and she's written a lot about what she's lived through, and you know, how at her young age she's learned so much, and she enjoys listening to this because she gets other perspectives from us who are older. So
Right.
I applaud her for being here and being open-minded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think again, you know, like, I mean, one of the things and why intergenerational connection is so important. Christina, I am sure that whatever point you are in your life, you have already experienced ageism because you're younger. And I think for, you know, to be able to kind of talk across and say, wait a minute, one of the things I talk a lot about when I'm talking about the business case for older workers in intergenerational teams is, why do we think it's okay to push out older people? Because we think they're making more money and we think we're going to save money by hiring someone and paying them less. And my thought is always like, you know, if you know how to do a certain thing, you ought to be paid for doing the certain thing. And it shouldn't be, oh, we're going to get away with paying someone less because they're younger, right? Those are the kind of things that are predominant in our society that all of us can stand up. So Christina, thank you for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you. So I know probably most of the people you associate with are very aware of aging and ageism, but do you ever find yourself in a position where you want to say something when somebody says something very ageist, and how do you handle that?
Well, I'm okay. I'm going to be having a number of opportunities this week, and one of the Boston Globe did a story on our anti-ageism birthday cards, and they did a great job. You know, the reporter was great, whatever. But some of the comments in there were like, "Whoa!" So I'm actually going to be on a radio show in Boston to, I think, respond to the comments. But what I would say is this: I have never thought that it was a good idea to just scream out at someone and say, "Oh, you're being ageist," right? I
Right.
think the more that we can kind of understand each other, that's why I really appreciate the work of Dr. Becca Levy, because it says, you know what, we're harming ourselves when we have these negative views about other older people and ourselves getting older. We're affecting our own physical and mental health. We're affecting our own lifespan, right? So I think just continuing to educate people. We have put together in the area of healthcare, I call it a speech bubble chart, but it's like when your healthcare provider says something really ageist, instead of starting to scream at them, you might say, you know, doctor, I really do want to know what is going on about and what my symptoms and what my options are, and not just be told I'm too old, right? So
Mhm.
so I think that there are things we can do. I think it's, you know, important to use I statements. I think it's important to talk respectfully, unless somebody is getting really rude, and then you can just tell them, sorry.
Right. I'm done. Like your dad. We're done with this
You're done with
conversation.
that. I know, my dad had the move. We're done.
So I always like to ask the guest if there are 2 or 3 takeaways they'd like to leave the audience with. And so I am asking you, Janine, what would you like to leave us
You
with?
bet. Well, one, can I just say we are going to be doing another round of an anti-ageism birthday card contest, and so we are announcing it on the Wendy Green Show. Hey, Boomer! This will check out our website. We'll be announcing it next week. But if you or anyone you know are a greeting card artist, one of the things that we've heard from people is they like giving humorous cards, and so this one we are going to be asking for cards that are humorous and clever, but that don't make fun of aging. Right. So we're going to challenge people's creativity to do that. So stay tuned for that. Things that I would like to leave people with. We can all educate ourselves about aging. We can all about aging and about ageism. We can all take small steps every day. And I love the example, Wendy, that you provided of your mom. Although, Mom, I think you're taking big steps. You know, if you're doing writing and advocacy, those are big steps, and they're really important. We need to use our voices to advocate for better and more age friendly policies. And finally, to me, what's really important, I have 2 daughters, I have a grandson now. I think when we're addressing ageism, we're not just doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for generations to come. I've always liked the Native American perspective of thinking 7 generations forward. And I like to think that when we're doing something to end ageism, we really are doing it for generations to come. So that's what I'd like to leave people with.
I love that. I love that. I always think about, what role model am I leaving for my children and grandchildren? Right. So yeah, thank you. You can find Janine at encoreroadmap.com. And you can go buy those gorgeous birthday cards. I go buy them. I mean, they are amazing. At changingthenarrativeco.org. And like she said, if you know somebody who is a greeting card artist, have them submit some designs because it's fabulous. I also, before we go, thank you, Janine, for everything.
Thank you.
Yes. Remember that you can subscribe to our email list at bit.ly/heyboomer-subscribe and share this with your friends, please, because we want to spread the word. And if you're interested in more information about our Costa Rica trip, then email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz. It's going to be amazing. Next Monday, you're going to meet Cynthia Covey Haller. And she's the daughter of Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And she worked with her dad on a book called Living Life in Crescendo before he passed away. And it was just published this month. So it so reflects the way we perceive life on Hey Boomer, like keep living life in crescendo and be large and do things and stay involved. So I really think that you're going to enjoy that. The subtitle of that is Your Most Important Work is Ahead of You. I like to leave you all with the belief that we can all live with passion, live with relevance, and live with courage. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green. Thank you, Janine Vanderburg. And this has been Hey Boomer.